Hello, and welcome back to This Month on the Railroad, my monthly rail news segment. This month's episode is a recap of November of 2021, and as per usual, it's being uploaded a few days late, but this time for a good reason. The past few days I've been in Florida, and I got some footage of Brightline for American High Speed Rail Week 2, which will come out sometime in early 2022. Anyways, I'll speak more on that in a special video coming at the end of December, so stay tuned. Anyways, let's get into the news. On the 31st of October, the Long Island Railroad ran their first test train on their new Eastside Access line, connecting the Long Island Railroad to Grand Central Terminal. This first test run was not only for a press event that they held, but also the first train to use the signals and other infrastructure in the tunnel. Regular testing will continue until December of 2022, when the line will open to the general public. At that point, the Long Island Railroad will operate trains to both Penn Station as they normally do, and also Grand Central, where for the first time ever, you'll be able to connect directly between the Long Island Railroad and Metro North. On November 1st, Canadian Pacific announced that they would be building an additional 2 hydrogen locomotives after receiving a $15 million grant from Emissions Reduction Alberta. This will add another XCMQ SD40-2F based hydrogen fuel cell locomotive and 1 hydrogen yard switcher. Additionally, funding will be used to build hydrogen generation stations in Calgary and Edmonton. When all is said and done, Canadian Pacific will roster a total of 3 hydrogen fuel cell locomotives, but if these 3 are successful, they may be widely adopted across the entire CP system, or even across multiple American railroads. On the 3rd, the first fully furnished Avelia Liberty train left the Alstom factory at Hornell, New York. This is the 3rd train set to leave the factory, but only the first to be officially accepted by Amtrak, as train set 1 was an unfurnished testing train set sent to TTCI in Pueblo, Colorado, and train set number 2 was a testing train set for the Northeast Corridor. Now that train set number 3 has been delivered, train set 2 can be returned to Alstom to be furnished. Also of note is that train set 3, in addition to being fully furnished, has a slightly revised paint scheme, adding car and power car roster numbers on their sides. Anyways, train set 3 should be the first Acela 2 to enter service sometime in 2022. The next day, Canadian National announced that they had ordered 1 Wabtec FLXDrive battery locomotive for their Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad in Pennsylvania. Shortly after CP's announcement to commit to 3 hydrogen locomotives, CN also announced that they would get an alternative fuel locomotive, which was partially paid for by a Pennsylvania state grant. Canadian railroads seem to be taking the lead when it comes to making their railroads more environmentally friendly, as BNSF tested one of these battery-powered locomotives earlier in the year and hasn't committed to ordering any. Anyways, Canadian National is the first North American railroad to order an FLXDrive locomotive, with the first order anywhere going to an Australian railroad. On the 4th, Amtrak ALC-42s number 300 and 301 made their way back to Washington D.C. after completing their testing in Michigan. Upon arrival back in D.C. on the Capital Limited, these 2 locomotives were shopped to make some software tweaks. 300 later began testing on the Northeast Corridor. On the same day, 2 other ALC-42s departed the Siemens plant in Florin, California. These 2 ALC-42s, 302 and 303, made their way east to Washington, D.C., joining the other 2 chargers. On the 5th, Congress funded a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. In this bill, $66 billion were for Amtrak, making this the most money Amtrak has received since its inception in 1971. This investment will fund improvements on the Northeast Corridor, new trains, and potential expansions as laid out in Amtrak's concept map. On the same day, Canadian Pacific released a new orange special interest unit. This one looks very similar to the new special unit from last month, but this one commemorates Hapag-Lloyd, a shipping company that CP partnered with to bring intermodal service to the easternmost parts of Canada. On the 6th, the ex-Conrail GP9 at Horseshoe Curve was revealed with a fresh new PRR paint job. This GP9 has sat around at the curve for years, and for a while it was getting pretty tattered, so around the end of the summer of 2021, 7048 began having its paint stripped and new paint added. After a couple month-long project, the 7048 has been returned to its former glory, or at least its former fresh Penzi paint job. A few days later, on the 8th, private higher-speed rail provider Brightline resumed service on their line between Miami and West Palm Beach, Florida. This was the first time Brightline operated trains since March of 2020, so it's been over a year since their last service. Additionally, I visited Brightline in Fort Lauderdale later in November. After over a week of no notable news, CSX's track inspection car, known as GMS2, was spotted on CSX's new executive paint scheme, which the railroad is painting onto much of its non-revenue service equipment. It seems every month now that CSX is releasing another repainted piece of equipment, probably because they are. The next day, the first of 3 diesel multiple unit train sets departed the Stadler plant in Salt Lake City. This was the first of 3 trains that will soon operate on the new Aero commuter rail between San Bernardino, California and Redlands, California. After the 3 diesel trains are delivered, 1 hydrogen-powered train will be delivered in 2024, making the first hydrogen passenger train in North America. The next day, Amtrak's Cascade service and the Amtrak Coast Starlight service resumed on the Port Defiance Pass, a rail line south of Tacoma, Washington that bypasses the Puget Sound, cutting a few minutes off trip times. This route is more efficient, but in 2017, the first Amtrak train to use it, Cascade's Train 501, infamously derailed, so that was the end of that. Luckily, now that service has resumed, no trains have derailed, and hopefully it will stay that way. On the same day, Amtrak ALC-42 number 300 was seen testing on the Northeast Corridor in New Jersey. This section of track between CP Ham and CP County has come to be known as the racetrack because it's where Amtrak has done top speed runs of the Acellas, Avelia Liberties, and now ALC-42s. The ALC-42s won't have to test nearly as much as the SC-44s did because they were deemed to be essentially identical to them internally, so the testing phase will be much shorter than that of other equipment. Finally, the last thing that happened on the 18th was that the MBTA completed their station consolidation project on the Green Line B line, consolidating Paul Street and BU West into Amory Street Station, and the old Babcock Street Station and Pleasant Street into a new Babcock Street Station. This project has been working to improve some of the infamously terrible stations on the B line, and now that it's complete, the MBTA can focus more on finishing the Green Line extension, which is set to open in early 2022. The next day, Western Maryland Scenic 2662 number 1309 was approved by the FRA to resume service after a 7-year overhaul. 1309 is now being tested before it will soon operate in passenger excursions. The Phoenix Metro received $158.1 million in funding for a 1.6-mile extension north of 19th and Dunlap Station, and service will begin in 2024 if the project is completed on time. This funding was actually approved earlier in the year, but it was officially signed off on the 22nd. On the 23rd, a flatbed truck was spotted carrying the top deck shell of an MBTA F40. Presumably throughout the month, most if not all of MBTA's original F40s were scrapped by the Grafton and Upton. Unfortunately, many rail fans, including myself, expected a ferry move from Rochester to North Grafton, but that never happened, with the G&U electing to scrap them on site in Rochester. Although it's a shame that the Screamers are no longer with us, it's not like they were going to do anything, as most of them were broken beyond repair by weather, a lack of care, and vandals. It is sad though that none of these F40s will be preserved. Speaking of F40s, on that same day, Stephen L. Abrams, the executive director of TriRail, posted a photo of TRCX number 809, one of TriRail's F40PHM-3Cs that was recently rebuilt by Progress Rail in Patterson, Georgia. When this F40 and the others were returned to TriRail in 2020, all units were painted completely in midnight blue with white lettering, but now it appears that 809 has received a wrap to complete its paint scheme. This new paint scheme keeps the original midnight blue but adds a splash of color with the partial wrap of a TriRail swoosh. Although this is technically a cost-cutting measure, which many rail fans tend to frown upon, I for one think it looks pretty good, and it really modernizes the look of TriRail, which I would consider to be one of the most dated-looking passenger railroads in the country. The next day, the STB announced that they had accepted KCS's merger application with CP as being complete, so now it's just up to them to read through it and decide whether they'll allow the merger to take place. On the 25th, New Brunswick Railway, a group of 3 short-line railroads in Maine and eastern Canada, took delivery of their 6th and final overhauled SD70M-2. These 6 SD70s were all painted in the same green paint scheme, but 6401 and 6402 were lettered for the New Brunswick Southern Railway. 6403 and 6404 were lettered for the Eastern Maine Railway, and 6405 and 6406 were lettered for the Maine Northern Railway. This seems to be a pretty interesting operation, and I might have to make a trip up there to check it out in the coming years. The next day, the same merger application that was just accepted by the STB was approved by the Mexican government, as this application would create a railroad between Canada, America, and Mexico. Now it's pretty much all up to the STB to approve the merger, and then we can have the first true Class 1 mega railroad. And that's all for the month of November. Once again, sorry for uploading the video late. Things have been pretty busy lately, and between going to Florida and being away at a train show all weekend, it's been hard to make videos. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next episode in 2022.